invitation me gave. La vida, ya, ya, me ha regalado yo, tantas cosas, ya, maravilloso yo, la vida, ya, me ha regalado yo, tantas cosas, ya, maravilloso yo, la vida, ya, me ha regalado yo, tantas cosas, ya, maravilloso yo, la vida, ya, me ha regalado yo, tantas cosas, ya, maravilloso yo. La vida, ya, me ha regalado yo, tantas cosas, ya, maravilloso yo, la vida, ya, me ha regalado yo, tantas cosas, ya, maravilloso yo. Ooh, you, what's your name? Where you going? Might find your state of mind keeps you from knowing inside there is a tune that's always playing. If you took the time, might hear what it's saying. Must go right into the to come out the other side. Oh, 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 must go right into the yes. This pain will not be denied. See, you've been suffering, and your pain is real. If all life is as one, of course you feel it. Oh, be kind to yourself. These times won't last forever. When you need to, you must go right into the yes, to come out the other side. Oh, 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 must go right into the yes, this pain will not be denied. Slow down, take a look around, listen to the sound of the earth is turning. You'll find there will come a time you can look behind and see how far you've come. Right now, tears come easy. I say it's a good way to be. No, you're alive when you know how to cry. You know you're alive when you know how to cry. Know how to cry.
Hello, hello. You good?
I'm
Hello,
good.
hello.
Hello, you good? We have volume. Hello. Hello. Do we get Sarah to introduce us? Clint always does.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Soul Food Books tonight. We are very pleased to have two of our very gay friends talk about the stars and all of those beautiful celestial bodies that help us walk through the world. So please put your hands together for Mr. Rick Levine and Jeff Sauer.
Good evening. Welcome to Soul Food. This is Astrology Night. I've had to muddle along myself for the past couple of months.
Well, I had to muddle along for a month before that, so
Right.
not so much self-righteousness.
So welcome back.
It's our first time together since August here.
Since August.
August, yeah.
Yes.
Between
Yeah, we did.
Spain and China and Bali
And places in
Airplanes.
between.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for coming. For those of you who are new to Astrology Night at Soul Food, what Rick and I are going to do is spend about 45 minutes or so talking about the general astrological patterns for the month ahead. This is the collective cosmic weather that rains, snows, and shines on all of us. And then we're going to take a break. And after the break, we're going to look at 3 individual charts. We'll do little mini readings just to give you examples of what individualized astrology looks like.
And I noticed that you started off saying we're going to talk about the year ahead when you really meant the month ahead. But for those of you who are interested in Jeff and I talking about the year ahead, this actually happens every year in January at Brighton Bush Hot Springs, which is an amazing jewel of the Northwest. It's about an hour out of Salem, Oregon, which is about an hour south of Portland, Oregon. And it's in the Cascades, old-growth forest, hot tubs, good food, and cosmic talk for an entire weekend. Jeff and I will be talking about 2013, along with doing the charts of each of the individual participants. This is our 5th year of doing it, I
Fifth
think?
or sixth.
Yeah.
And what we'll do on the weekend, after doing an overview of the year ahead on Friday night, Saturday and Sunday, we're going to work with the birth chart of each one of the attendees. So if you have the opportunity of coming, you will definitely have your chart looked at and talked about by Rick and me in front of the group to help give you some ideas and strategies and ways of working with the year ahead in a successful manner.
That's if there's a year ahead, because of course, no astrology night on December, the first Wednesday night of December in the year of 2012 would be worth its salt if we didn't remind you that the world ends for all the wrong reasons on the winter solstice on December 21st, 2012.
Well, yes, but
Yeah.
for sure. But in case it doesn't end and we all make it to Brighton Bush, you can find out about it by going to stariq.com. That's STARIQ.com, the website that Rick and I created. There's a link to information about the weekend workshop at Brighton Bush. And if you sign up and the world ends, there's no loss anyway. But, a number of people, of course, have been talking about this sort of end of the world business, which is not primarily an astrological interpretation at all. But I think what's helpful is for those of us who have any sort of consciousness, awareness, or hope of growing such for yourself or humanity, that let's make it a new world. What would you like in your personal new world? What would you like in our collective new world? This is a new year that we're looking forward to. The solstice is a new season, so we have plenty of opportunities to take this tide, which people are riding with ignorance and fear, and put a little hope and intelligence in it and take it to someplace a bit more interesting than simple despair.
And although there may be a turnover in the long cycle of the Mayan calendar, the 5,125-year great year, the fact is that most of the astrological projections aimed at December 21st, or those you've probably seen on the internet with the 3 planets over the 3 pyramids, bullshit. That was supposed to be yesterday, day before yesterday. Nothing happened. The alleged alignment of the sun with the center of our galaxy on December 21st, 2012 is approximately 2 centuries
Off. Yeah, it's
I mean,
close, but, a couple of 100 years,
from
give
the
or take.
from the Earth's point of view, the center of our galaxy now is somewhere around 27, 28 degrees of Sagittarius, and it moves 1 degree every 72 years. So we're close to about 150 to 200 years away from the sun lining up with the center of our galaxy as is being thrown around. Now, there may be an alignment of the wobbling plane of the solar system with the apparent stationary plane of the galaxy, but that's not what most people are talking about. And in fact, that too, there's question. It's very difficult to fine-tune cycles that last tens or hundreds of thousands of years and pinpoint them to one evening. It ain't going to happen.
And as Rick and I have been discussing now for quite some time, we are in the midst of a very significant astrological cycle.
Absolutely.
The square, the right angle between revolutionary Uranus and transformational Pluto, which began earlier this year in 2012, continues on and off through 2015. So we are in a wider period of time in which there's an extraordinary opportunity for transformation, which is more than simply the breakdown of the economy, environmental disaster, or other nasty and undesirable stuff. In fact, I heard a news item on NPR about the Voyager spacecraft, which has been out there for, 20 or 30 years and is now at the edge of the solar system. They don't know whether it's really quite hit it yet or whether it will happen in the next couple of years or so, but it is the point at which the cosmic radiation coming into the solar system from stars outside of our system meet the solar radiation. And what that suggests is we're at a breakthrough. We're at a potential point in human consciousness to go beyond the containers that we have lived in, not only for our lives, but for our ancestors' lives as well.
And also other discoveries very recently in the past weeks, including water. I mean, abundant water on the planet Mercury and organic matter on Mars. I think that the metaphor of this river of photons that they've discovered at the edge is part of a larger picture that you're describing of breaking out of the comfortable place in our individual lives and cosmically where we were and where we're heading. I mean, we are heading in some ways for the great unknown, and we'll come back to this again and again, not only tonight, but monthly, and that is as we move collectively, culturally, socially, politically, economically into this great unknown, we do not have control over all of those things, but we do have control over some of the things in our individual lives. And we do have control over whether we engage out of trust and love or whether we pull back out of fear. And this whole thing about this 2012 end of the world on December 21st, although nothing other than another solstice, which is important, nothing else is happening astrologically on that day, I'm of the firm belief whenever you get more than a handful of people together thinking cosmic thoughts or thinking fearful thoughts, that creates its own ripple. So there may be import on this particular day because people from all over the planet are focusing their energy on this day. And all I can say is that if you participate in that, know that you can participate either out of fear or out of trust and love.
Well said. And every year on the winter solstice, the sun is moving into Capricorn, which does feel like the end of the world, especially for Sagittarians, which is what we all are now a little bit. Regardless of what your chart is, what your signs are, we all experience collective changes together. So this month, at least until the 21st, we're all Sagittarians because that's where the sun is. And although we began by talking about longer cycles, whether it's the Mayan calendar or Uranus square Pluto, the way astrological patterns tend to work is that faster moving, shorter cycles trigger the bigger, longer ones. And if the world is going to change in a dramatic way, we've got enough visionary Sagittarius. Let's strap ourselves onto that rocket and ride it to wherever the hell it wants to take us this month to enjoy the experience and to expand our minds.
Yeah, I think that is really the case. Of course, the idea of strapping ourselves onto this rocket and heading off into the sunset. This image of what was how I learned to love the bomb.
Dr. Strangelove.
Dr. Strangelove. Somehow riding the rocket ship may not be quite as easy. Certainly adrenaline rush creating, but it may not be as easy as it sounds. It sounds like a good idea, but it's not without its pitfalls.
Oh, absolutely. The pitfalls of Sagittarius, which is the half horse, half archer shooting the arrow up into the sky, represents sort of that ride towards something bigger, towards the great beyond. And of course, the pitfall of that is while we're looking at the far end of the horizon, we may be stumbling over our own 2 feet. Now, there is a school of esoteric astrology. And in esoteric astrology, the Earth is the key ruling planet of Sagittarius. And I think what that suggests is, from an esoteric perspective, it's necessary to have our feet solidly planted on the ground if we're really going to go far. If we're aiming at something nearby, if I'm aiming to hit this with an object, this nearby thing, I don't have to be very accurate to hit it. I don't have to be that grounded to hit it. But the further you aim, the more the error is amplified. So if we're going to be Sagittarian in any way, expanding our mind, expanding our ambitions, and having hope beyond reason, it doesn't mean that we can't also have some reason about where we are so that we can make the impossible come true.
You just touched on an image that's very Sagittarian to me, and that is Sagittarius in the physical body rules the thighs. For animals, it's like the horse that can, when it's galloping, when it's going far, a thoroughbred horse has that extension, the ability to go the long distance, which is what Sagittarius is. However, that same long-distance runner, the ability to really reach farther, to reach for that distant star, as you said, is often that same Sagittarian person who can be very graceful when they're doing practiced moves, can be the one that'll stumble around and walk into walls and be very clumsy with the local, with the details. And here we have the differential, perhaps, between Jupiter, which is Sagittarius's key planet, and Jupiter, Sagittarius is opposite Gemini, and Mercury is Gemini's planet. And so right now, what's really fascinating is that Jupiter is in the sign that's opposite. Normally, Jupiter is associated with Sagittarius. Jeff said that we are all Sagittarians now a bit, because we're in that time of year when the sun spends its month in the sign of Sagittarius. But Jupiter, which spends a year in each sign, takes 12 years to go around once. Jupiter is as far away from the sun as it can ever get, and it's in Gemini. And as Sagittarius likes the general principle, the big idea, going long, going far, Gemini is about the noise in our environment. It's about tying our shoelaces, not getting a rocket ship to the edge of the universe. And so I think that dilemma becomes part of the issue that is kind of brought up again and again this month.
Yeah, that's a very good point. In traditional astrology, Jupiter is considered to be debilitated or weaker in Gemini. Why? Because it's about the big view, and Gemini is about the trivia, the multiplicity of data, so that Jupiter doesn't function as well. And this month, on the 10th, Mercury, Gemini's key ruling planet, the planet of details, moves into visionary Sagittarius, a sign in which it is traditionally considered to be debilitated or weakened. Now, I think what this means is that calibrating our vision is the challenge. Nearsightedness and farsightedness. When do we pay attention to those things that are right in front of us, which Mercury and Sagittarius tends to overlook? When is it appropriate to step back and get the big picture view, which Jupiter in Gemini sometimes has difficulty doing? So it's almost as if we're dealing with mental energy here. Mercury is lower mind, what we call fact collecting, data oriented mind. Jupiter is higher mind of philosophy and principle or long range vision. And when Mercury goes into Sagittarius, I think it's very good you brought that up, Rick, that a major theme is going to be making that calibrated adjustment between, are we talking about something that's true for today, or are we talking about something that's a long-term goal or an ultimate truth? This also means be careful, not just in what you say, but in what you believe. Because Mercury in Sagittarius can make something trivial sound much more important than it is. And Jupiter in Gemini can take something really important and trivialize it.
Yeah, I think you've pointed out a number of times over these past weeks or past months, Jupiter moved into Gemini over the summer, and it made some real new territory in Gemini. Then it turned retrograde. It's covering old territory that it's already been over, and then it will push forward again later in the year and then move on into Cancer early next summer, late next spring. But what's interesting to me, this dilemma, this being pulled in two directions, one to the very big, Sagittarius, and the other to the details, the very small, Gemini. It's almost like we're seeing that on the political scene now with this whole thing of the fiscal cliff.
Right.
I mean, there's something here about a concept which is become like Jupiterian. It's this belief about we have to do something about this cliff. And yet there's all these details of what's really going on that may or may not have anything to do with that. And there's something here about this recent opposition of the Sun opposite Jupiter, which happened just a couple days ago, and Jupiter and the Sun being in opposite signs, and that whole dance that we're doing with belief and how belief in one little detail can become like the only thing that's important, and it may just be part of a shell game.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And of course, what's going on is a lot of political dancing where people are saying something, stating a position that they're not really committed to. It's a negotiating position. And that may be a means by which we come to some kind of agreement. But I think you're right, Rick. There's a lot of smoke being blown all over the place. The fiscal cliff, so-called cliff, was created to put pressure on the government to resolve certain issues. The very people who created this deadline can, of course, uncreate the deadline. This is not a question of where you stand politically or what's the right way to get it. But my personal belief, this is not an astrological concept, is, you know, all of this talk about taxes and spending and blah, 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 we're talking about mechanics without addressing the larger issues of who we are as a culture, what we are as a nation, how we fit in a world of nations.
As if Jupiter was in Gemini.
That's right. That's right.
Duh.
Right, that people are puffing up principled ideas about things that aren't really big principles.
Agreed.
But I think that's often what we do when we're unaware. And with a lack of awareness, there's an impotence, a powerlessness that's made up for by bullshit. So, you know, when you've got the teenage kid who's driving you crazy and you have no real way to get a handle on it, then you start attacking trivial things. What time you come home, what kind of makeup you're wearing, because these are ways to sort of address the issue without really addressing the issue. So I think it's very important to not just, of course, look at this externally with respect to the political sphere, but also in our own personal lives. What are you blowing up? That's really important. That might not be that important, but it's the best you can do about your career, about your relationship, about your appearance, about your spirituality, whatever it is you want to address.
And as we make our way through the month, through December, we're going to talk about some more things going through the month. I want to point out something. This is the chart for December 1st, 2nd, December 1st, December 2nd. on the day that Jupiter was opposite the sun. You can see that big, fat, thick red line between Jupiter and the sun. And these green lines here, and actually this one too, but these two I want to focus on just for a moment. Those are the astrological aspect called a quincunx, which is Latin for 5/12, quincunx. And it's an aspect of annoyance, of adjustment. It's like it's not easy to fix it, but it's not easy to make it go away. And it doesn't go away, and so it bugs us. And the reason, although this is past this Jupiter quincunx Mars and Jupiter quincunx Venus, what we've had over the past few days is an alignment of Mars and Pluto and an alignment of Saturn and Venus. This is the month began with a bit of intensity. But the thing I want to focus on here are these quincunx green lines between Jupiter, Mars, and Venus that by the end of the month, the heavyweights, Saturn and Pluto, move in to where Venus and Mars are now. And so this annoyance that kind of it's difficult to get that right sense of what's the little detail, what's the big. Where do we stand with our beliefs compared to what's important? That this is an issue that although it might feel like it's getting better over the next few days, it's an issue that's with us through the month. And by the end of the year, whether it's fiscal cliff related or relationship related or personal finances related, this is an issue that will come back to us.
Yeah, good point. The other thing, too, is that right now we're in the latter part of the monthly cycle of the sun and the moon. That the sun and moon do their 28-day dance every month. And at the end of the cycle, maybe we've got some awareness, but we're also not, we've got old stuff. We're going to get some new juice. On the 12th of this month, on the 13th of this month, we have a new moon in Sagittarius. And new moons occur every month when the sun and the moon join together. They're joining together in the visionary sign of Sagittarius, representing the consciousness of the sun, the will of the sun, and the instinct and the emotions of the moon, which are joined together to conceive a new set of visions. Now, we might not know exactly where they're going to go, and we might not even have the visions immediately, but there is a rising force of potential awareness that occurs then. And on that very same day, on the 13th of December, Uranus, the planet of revolution, the planet of breakthrough, the planet whose discovery doubled the size of the solar system well over 200 years ago, Uranus begins moving forward. What that means is that it's apparently been moving backwards for about 4.5 to 5 months. When planets move backwards or retrograde from a perspective here on Earth, their energies tend to be inhibited or internalized. Uranus, turning around and going forward, suggests that the revolutionary ideas, the potential for breakthroughs that this planet represents with the new moon in Sagittarius can certainly, on the highest level, represent lots of opening intellectually and philosophically.
Yeah, and let's come back to that new moon just for a moment on December 13th. This is Mercury has just moved, as Jeff talked about earlier. Mercury just moved from Scorpio into Sagittarius.
That's on the 10th. Yeah.
That's on the 10th. And then with the new moon in Sagittarius, this is going to really pull our energy outward into the big picture. Forget about the details in some way. And as Uranus, that same day and over the next day or two, as it begins to turn from retrograde to direct and begin moving forward, the interesting thing is here, we're really blasted forward in a lot of ways because Mercury, which is just a few days earlier moved into Sagittarius, Mercury forms a harmonious trine with Uranus. Now, Mercury went retrograde, about a month and a half ago? And on the day it went retrograde...
The 6th of November.
The 6th of November. On the day it went retrograde, Mercury had just barely, almost reached an exact trine with Uranus. I mean, it was close enough that we could taste it, we could feel it. There was excitement, there was buzz, and then Mercury began retrograding. So on this day after the new moon, the day of the new moon and the day after the new moon, Mercury finally makes that trine with Uranus, and Mercury and Uranus are both intellectual in a way, as is that Sagittarius, this is a lot of young, fiery, spiritual, outgoing energy. Mercury is how we communicate. Uranus is lightning-like. And so we can expect this new moon to really blast us, I think, into the future, whatever that means.
Yeah, I think that's well put. And for those who don't know, a trine is an angle of 120 degrees. It represents an ease of flow. It's a low friction, high flow astrological angle. And it's kind of interesting because Mercury goes into Sagittarius on the 10th. The following day, is that correct? Yeah, the following day, Mercury runs into a stressful angle called a square with spacey, dreamy Neptune.
If you're going to have a stressful
right
aspect, let it be with Neptune.
This is that's on the 11th. This is not a day to buy a used car, because, or probably not a new one either, because Mercury, the talker in Sagittarius, is especially good at telling overly optimistic stories. And Neptune is beyond optimistic. Neptune is totally capable of dissolving this reality to create a beautiful, phantasmagoric reality that doesn't have much ground below it.
It's a good day to go to a hypnotist.
It is.
Because you can believe anything.
Right.
No, I mean, that can be a positive thing.
Right, but what it also means, too, is if you experience it as a feeling of intellectual emptiness. Neptune is the emptiness that contains everything. It's the wisdom of the everything nothing that can't be articulated. And Mercury in Sagittarius, which always has something to sell, to say, to prove it, runs into Neptune. It can go into total bullshit land or go, oh my God, so that, and we're in the dark of the moon then, we're really sort of skidding off the end of the reality trail, although opening up to a fantastic place for imagination. But as Rick pointed out, when Mercury aligns favorably with Uranus, just 3 days later on the 14th, it's almost as if the mental mechanism, which has slipped out of gear with Neptune, slipping and sliding, we don't even believe our own bullshit then. When it forms that alignment with Uranus, it's an opportunity to get back into a newer, higher, and different gear.
You know, as you were talking, Jeff, the image that I had was when Mercury slides into Sagittarius and squares Neptune. That's the day when the viruses on the internet, the viral videos on the internet about the alien landings on the solstice and the end of the world, they become rampant. However, by the 14th, when Mercury trines Uranus, that's the day we have our own personal confrontation with an alien.
Right. Well, that's when we can talk to them and see them. That's right.
Because this is about breakthrough, and I hope you understand that I'm not actually saying that as real. I'm using that as a metaphor because what seems to be bullshit, cosmic craziness with the Mercury square Neptune, after that new moon when Mercury trines Uranus, it's like we begin to see the potential of what's really there. And we actually can go that extra distance or concept or idea to some place that we've never been before, and some place that only last week we might have thought was ridiculous.
Yeah, good metaphor. And Venus, the planet of love, quickly picks up the same trail. Now, Venus is romantic energy, it's self-worth energy, it's pleasure energy, relationship energy, and Venus enters Sagittarius on the 15th of December. In traditional astrology, Venus in Sagittarius is neither good nor bad, especially. In a positive sense, it means the principles of love and self-worth and pleasure are triggered by expanding our field of vision and possibility. It can evoke some kind of restlessness. The things that pleased us before might not be quite as pleasing when Venus is in Sagittarius because things need to move. As I often say here, an old friend of Rick's and mine said many years ago, and she has Venus in Sagittarius, that her favorite word was next. So that's because pleasure is represented by Venus in where are we going? Sagittarius is that sort of movement away from where we are. It can be escapist in a negative sense, or it could be adventurous in a positive sense.
Yeah, and that movement of energy into Sagittarius, if you look up here, starting around the 10th when Mercury goes into Sagittarius, and then you can see here it's followed by Venus. We have Venus in Sagittarius, Mercury in Sagittarius, the Sun in Sagittarius. Mercury in Sagittarius is coming up to be exactly opposite Jupiter, which is going to, kind of even pull that even more. And Venus, as she moves into Sagittarius, makes that 90-degree square, just like Mercury did the week before, makes the 90-degree square with Neptune, and then over the next few days, it makes on the 19th, it makes an exact trine with Uranus. And again, we have that sense of bumping into the illusion, Neptune, in some way that can be tricky, can be problematic. It's a square. It can be creative but stressful. Followed by its trine to Uranus. Venus is trine to Uranus now. It's not just an intellectual breakthrough. This is a breakthrough in our aesthetics and what we like in our tastes. This is a time when that which was experimental and negatively judged prior now might sound like a good idea, whether it is or not.
Yeah, that's good. Then as we go towards the 21st, the 21st is the solstice. I say solstice. Rick says solstice. We looked it up. They're both acceptable pronunciations.
But we both say tomato.
Absolutely. At any rate, on the 21st, the sun goes into Capricorn. We begin a new season. It's a very important shift in the annual cycle. And it really is about taking the vision and the aspiration of Sagittarius and beginning to look at what structures are needed to make it real. Capricorn is an earth sign. It doesn't deal in theories primarily. It deals in real world applications of things. And yet, one thing that I'm finding quite nice, on the 21st, while the sun goes into hard-nosed Capricorn, it does form a harmonious 60-degree angle called a sextile with compassionate and sensitive Neptune, imaginative Neptune. And while Rick talked earlier that Venus square Neptune, which was on the 16th, can be romantic illusion or fantasy, what's happening is that the sun of will and consciousness in I can make it real Capricorn, aligning with Neptune, can perhaps allow us to feel and recognize that there isn't a conflict between reality and dreams, and that we can perhaps create the ideal and bring it down to earth and make it manifest in our lives.
And I think, Jeff, that brings up something that began when Saturn moved into Scorpio back in October. In early October, when Saturn moved into Scorpio, it made a trine. It harmonized with Neptune, and it does that again next year, next May, June, July, which we'll talk about a lot approaching those months, because this is, as they say in Indonesian, bagus, which means good.
It's bagus.
Bagus, which is very good.
Right.
And the sun's connection with Neptune, as you were talking about it, in some ways, because the sun in Capricorn is Saturn's sign, that in some ways it really kind of brings back into question or into answer this ability to take that which is real and imagine something greater and then make it real too.
Right, but the critical thing with Capricorn is patience. Making it real isn't an overnight process.
No, it may take till May, June, July when this grand trine kicks in, or even longer.
That's right, but at least there is a sort of the beginning of the building of a web. Well, or a continuation. The Saturn-Neptune trine began it. It's another strand in the web we are weaving to a more magical and inspired reality.
Yeah, and there's another piece of this that makes the solstice or solstice, which do I say? It makes whatever that is even more potent as to what you were saying about manifesting reality, because Pluto and Saturn are coming into a trine that's not exact until the 26th.
A sextile.
A sextile, thank you. Saturn and Pluto will be sextile exact on the 26th, but they're within a sixth of a degree already here. And here's the magical thing that I talked about, where the beginning of the month we had Mars and Venus making these green lines with Jupiter. Now on the 20th and the 22nd, Saturn and Pluto both make this exact quincunx. Even though they're harmonized amongst themselves, astrologers call this pattern a finger of God, because it's annoying and yet you know where you gotta go. You know, it's not an easy one that can be solved in the moment, but we have a tremendous power base behind us. Liz Green, a Jungian kind of archetypal astrologer, once said that Saturn was Pluto's only friend. I mean, look, Saturn is Satan. It's the end of the world as we know it. Saturn is the the Grim Reaper. Saturn is, Father Time and death. Pluto, on the other hand, is the realization that death is just another transition and that it never ends. So and Pluto is the lord of the hell realm. When you die, you don't die. You transform into something else. And so now Saturn and Pluto, these two heavyweights that have to do with transformation and making things real and accomplishing things that have persistence. These two planets are working together as the sun is making that sweet sextile with Neptune. So I think this is a pretty magical time. Not easy, but magical.
Yeah, because when planets harmonize, and particularly slow-moving planets like Saturn and Pluto, they don't represent immediate events, but it's almost like the deepest structures of psyche are aligning in a way that are permitting profound change to happen without being overwhelmingly disturbing. It's again that image of a gear, but it's a very big, slow gear. But what Saturn and Pluto have in common, among other things, to what Rick has pointed out, is they're both about compression. They both squeeze. And I think their double quincunxes to Jupiter in Gemini is about choice making.
Yeah, I agree.
That because Jupiter in Gemini has to do with having too many choices.
And Jupiter in Gemini wants to do it all. Jupiter in Gemini says yes before it knows what the proposition is.
Right.
I'm in.
And both and
I agree with whatever you're going to say next. No, that's Jupiter and Gemini. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jeff.
Right. But that very much Pluto is addition by subtraction. It's about learning what to cut out. Saturn has that quality, not quite operant in the same way, but it's suggesting that letting go of a belief, a plan, an expectation, or the secondary or tertiary ones that you're holding out here, like the potential job that you'll have to take if you couldn't get the one you want, the potential boyfriend, girlfriend you could have if you couldn't get the one that you want, cut them out. Imagine that you didn't have that option. Imagine that you didn't have that option. And what it challenges you to do is to find the means to engage those deeper gears. It's about taking ourselves seriously, even if our ideas are foolish. Because Jupiter in Gemini can be filled with foolish ideas. But even in a basket full of foolish ideas, one of them, applied patiently, becomes wisdom.
So, Jeff, you started out talking about, I don't remember what, this might have even been before we started, when we were just talking before the mics were on, but I think you said this also about how this month with the sun in Sagittarius, that there really is, at least much of this month, that Jupiter is like a key player throughout the month. And what's interesting is we started out the month with the sun back here opposite Jupiter, and we end the month with Mercury on the Mercury on the 17th opposite Jupiter, and Venus on the 22nd opposite Jupiter. And again, remember, these planets that are opposite Jupiter are all in Sagittarius. The idea of the big idea, the adventure, the edge of the universe, the grandiose thinking. Whereas Jupiter, the planet of expansion, is saying, yes, but pay attention to the details. You can't be everywhere, every when. You have to be here and now. And the annoyance of these quincunxes that we can't quite get it right. And yet, if you can't get it right, you keep practicing. That's what yoga is, in a way. You keep going into the posture, and even though each time you go into it, there may be something wrong with it, you get better at going in and out of the posture. And I think that's part of what December is all about. It's becoming comfortable with moving in and out of the detail to the big idea, the detail to the big idea, and there's something to be gained from that process, rather than either one of them being the right answer.
And things change kind of dramatically in the last week of the month.
In the last
It makes me think,
week of the year.
right, of the month and of the year. It also makes me think what this quincunx is also about is, because I'm looking at the holidays, and on Christmas Day, the 25th, the sun is in a 90-degree angle with Uranus, the planet of revolution, rebellion, a planet that doesn't necessarily invite the calmest, most cooperative holiday experience. And on the same day, Mars, the fighter, gets into enters Aquarius, where it too doesn't feel very much like following the rules. So considering the usual stuff that comes up when families get together, and the high tension with potential for breakthroughs that are going on this year, I think part of the Saturn-Pluto, and it's one
Which is exact the same day or the following day,
is about recognizing that you don't have to respond to the beliefs of other people all the time. I mean, I do a lot of online stuff, and I read readers' comments, and the amount of times that I want to respond to people far exceeds, thank goodness, the amount of times I do respond. But what I think Saturn and Pluto to Jupiter and Gemini says is, don't get mad at Uncle Frank for his stupid racist remark. As much as it's annoying and ignorant, choose your battles carefully. Because with Jupiter and Gemini, it's where we started. There's a lot of smoke out there. So don't take the smoke seriously unless you've got a serious way to deal with it.
There's a lot of smoke out there, and it's legal here in this state.
As of today, light them
Make
up,
you
folks,
proud to
if
be
you
a
got 'em.
Washingtonian.
Yeah, welcome to Washington.
No,
Oh, it's tomorrow.
yeah.
Yeah, no, we can't get high legally until tomorrow. So knock it off, you back there. Hey, you. Cut it out.
But again, the same issue keeps coming round,
Yeah.
and I agree with you, Jeff. This week between Christmas and New Year's or New Year's Day, I mean, not only remember, although it's not the theme of discussion tonight, those of you who have been coming here for a year or so and may come again in the future know that whatever,
If there is a future. You forgot that part.
That's right. Thank you for the disclaimer.
Okay.
That everything that's happening now, all these triggers in some way, are really about a replaying from a different perspective of what went on in the mid-late 1960s when Uranus and Pluto were lined up, and now they're square. And the reason, although they're not exactly square, again, they come in and out of focus, as Jeff said earlier, 7 times between last June and March of 2015. But although they're not exactly square now, they're a good 5 degrees, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. They're about 5 degrees from being exactly square. The fact is that when the sun on the 26th, as Jeff talked about, squares Uranus on the day that Mars moves into Uranus's sign Aquarius, that's half of the story. The other half of the story is over the next several days, the sun gets closer and closer and closer to Pluto, and it conjuncts Pluto on December 30th. And that's the other half of the story. And it's really one event, although it might seem like two separate holidays and it might seem like two separate murders. I'm kidding.
Horror shows.
It, in fact, is all part of the same scenario.
Absolutely. And on the 28th, we have the full moon. Now, we know how much fun full moons can be. And this full moon, which is in the sign of Cancer, which is very sensitive and takes things personally, opposite the cold, cruel, uncaring sun in Capricorn. Yes, I know you fed me and clothed me my whole life, but you didn't read my mind and know my unstated needs, so you really don't love me. That's a Cancer moon kind of thing. But
Hey, wait a minute. I have one of those.
yeah, I know. That's where I got that line from. It's what you've said to me a dozen times since this tonight. But the full moon is always a heightened time of energy in which there's a potential for awareness, but also extremes. And this particular full moon, which is on the 28th, is opposite Pluto, the lord of the underworld, the planet of transformation, because Pluto is joining the sun, the sun is joining Pluto. 2 days later, power struggles, feelings of abuse, manipulation, control. Those are some of some negative Pluto issues. And it's also square and 90 degrees away from Uranus. This is a soul-breaking, shaking, rattling, and rolling planetary pattern that many of us, I'm sure, will breeze through because it's not our karma to have this be a trigger point, but collectively, it is a big one. And like any big collective event like this, one part of it might be horror shows, and the other part of it may also be incredibly deep and transformational things. It all depends what Elizabeth Warren can do on the Banking Commission. I think the committee, I think it really comes down to that.
Jeff, I think what you just said is very accurate. What's extraordinary about this full moon is that there's not one major, what we call configuration, an aspect involving 3 or more planets. And Jeff just talked about the configuration of the full moon involving the sun and the moon, but that moon also being opposite Pluto because the sun is coming into the conjunction to Pluto, and also being square. You see, it takes a week for the sun, or 6 days for the sun to go from the square to Uranus to the conjunction of Pluto. It only takes the moon a few hours. And so the whole event of the sun squaring Uranus on the sun squaring Uranus
It's on the 25th.
on the 25th, and the sun conjuncting Pluto on the 30th. That's a 5-day scenario. And yet at the full moon, in the course of just several hours, the moon not only squares Uranus, opposes the sun, and opposes Pluto. So that involves 4 planets, and it's a big one. But at the same time, we have the Saturn exact sextile Pluto, which does give us this base for deep transformation, although it's annoying because of all the opportunities, Jupiter in Gemini. But we also have this amazing release here because the moon, as it's going to oppose Pluto just a few hours later, is also trining Saturn. So do you see this pattern here? There's actually 3 different patterns. One involves the Saturn-Pluto with Jupiter at the opposite point. One involves Saturn-Pluto with the moon opposite Pluto and the sun. And the other one involves the full moon with Uranus. And any one of these 3 configurations would be juice. The square by itself that Jeff talked about is really, it's hard. I mean, it's not that it can't be creative and magical and powerful and profound, but it's not easy. But it has some real grounded energy with that Saturn trining the moon and sextiling the Uranus and the sun, that it really does have a place to stand that can be, I think, very powerfully transforming.
I agree that we have a safety net here. The thing is,
if we're willing to go
there to
there.
an unsafe place.
I agree.
Because Saturn's trine, Saturn, the planet of boundaries, harmonious relationship to the emotional, self-protective Cancer moon. Saturn is in Scorpio, the same place where the integrative north node of the moon is, in Scorpio. And what that means is safety comes from a willingness to face our fears, to enter our shadow, and to engage things that aren't necessarily emotionally comfortable. If we're looking for safety that's also comfortable, that's probably the most dangerous position we can put ourselves in.
I agree.
That's the one where we are most likely to experience internal and or external crisis of a dangerous type. But when we are willing to examine our own values, examine our own relationships, and recognize that there is at the bottom of our fears something that can empower us and strengthen us, then we pick up on Saturn and miracles become possible.
And by the last day of the year on New Year's Eve, I mean, we have the Sun conjuncting Pluto on the day before New Year's Eve, but the Sun, Pluto together are still sextiling, and the Sun sextiles the Saturn exactly on New Year's Day, New Year's Eve. What time is it? Yeah, it's New Year's Day.
Well, New Year's Eve is midnight on the 1st.
Right, but on the 30th.
Right. The Sun, Pluto?
The Sun, Pluto, and the Sun sextile Saturn also later that morning. So the Sun's, so this Sun, Pluto conjunction, both sextiling Saturn, even though the world as we know it is being melted down, there's a place for the butterfly to reform its structure, even though the caterpillar is gone.
Well said. So that's our look at the month of
Yikes.
December.
How exciting is that?
Yeah. All right. Well, what we're going to do is we're gonna take a short break. If you'd like us to look at your chart, we're going to pick 3. Write your first name, your time, date, and place of birth. And if you can leave them on this table over here, we'll pick 3 of them. During the interim here, please patronize Soul Food. They don't charge money, and that's because they're a community organization. Let's support the community of Soul Food by buying things. Happy shopping therapy.
And when you put your birth date, place, and time on a piece of paper, 2 things. 1, putting it on a 8.5 by 11-inch piece of paper doesn't give you a better chance of being selected. In fact, it may lessen your chance, and attaching a $100 bill to it maybe raises your chance. So
All right.
we'll see you all in about 10 or 15 minutes or so, and we'll pick 3 charts. And remember, when we do this, it's not for the benefit of any one of you individually. I want to say it's not for the benefit of Mr. Kite, but never mind. It's not for the benefit of you that we're doing the chart. It's for the benefit of all of us. We use your chart as a teaching tool to kind of drill down again on some of the things that we talked about here. And so feel free, though, to put your name in the hat or on the table, and we will see you in about 15 minutes. Thank you all, and thank you, Soul Food, and Sarah, and Clint, and Lily for giving us awesome
Craig.
coffee. I'm sorry, Craig and Lily, whoever you are. Thanks. Before we break, Jeff and I write an annual book called Your Astrology Guide. If you buy one, Craig is holding it up right now. If you buy one this evening for yourself or as a gift, Jeff and I will be happy to sign each other's names in the front cover of the book for you. And we prefer that you buy it here rather than buying it from Barnes & Noble or Amazon or somewhere else. Thanks.
You know the right way home. I know I will find. You know the right way home. I know I will find. You know the right way home. on a slave for. I